to give a little bit of an introduction to somebody who is a friend and colleague of mine. Melanie served as the executive chair, actually initially chief executive and then executive chair of the Biotechnology and Biological Sciences Research Council. That's BBSRC, which many of you are very familiar with, which is part of UKRI now between April 2018 and June 2023. She was responsible for the 420 million pounds of annual public expenditure in bioscience research, training and infrastructure. Melanie was also the UKRI executive champion for people, culture and talent, and oversaw the development and publication of the organisation's first equality, diversity and inclusion strategy. She's a graduate of Imperial College in biochemistry and completed a PhD at University College London, and was a postdoctoral fellow at the University of British Columbia before coming back to run her own research group at the University of Bath, focusing on molecular signalling and stem cell research. She was awarded a DBE for services to bioscience in 2023 in the King's Birthday Honours List, and she's currently an independent trustee at the University of Bath and the Royal Society of Biology, and she serves on the advisory board of the Institute of Technical Skills and Strategy. And now she's going to give us a lecture on reflections on career paths, life at the science policy interface, and opportunity for bioscience. So Melanie, over to you, and very warm welcome.
It's a real pleasure to join you today and to be invited by the Royal Society of Biology to deliver this charter lecture. And I just wanted to thank Ian as president and as a colleague and friend for that very kind introduction. I will start off by giving you a quick outline of what I want to talk about today. I will touch on my own career path, give you a short summary of that, really to sort of set the context for what I'm going to talk about, and to sort of set the thread, I think, of the presentation as well. I'll then spend quite a lot of the talk reflecting on life at the science policy interface. So that captures the time that I spent at BBSRC and UK Research and Innovation, and obviously where the particular focus was on research policy. And I will bring that to life, hopefully with some examples and reflections. And then I will finish by reflecting on some opportunities for bioscience. But I should make it clear at the start, that these views are very much personal views. They're very much my own thoughts and reflections. So I'd be happy to discuss any of those things in questions at the end of the presentation. So Ian has sort of summarised some of the elements of my career, but I want to take us back a little bit further into time. And I can trace my origins to bioscience right back to my secondary comprehensive school that I attended in rural Essex. So I spent my formative years growing up in the countryside in Suffolk and in Essex. I was really fortunate actually at the school that I attended that I had really inspiring chemistry and biology teachers who recognised my interests in understanding more about how biology and chemistry worked. And they were really instrumental in encouraging me to think about how I could combine those interests and how that could shape and inform my career. So they were the ones who encouraged me to think about biochemistry, and they were the ones who encouraged me to think about going to university, because no one in my family had been to university at that point. So I was the very first person to take that step. My family were very supportive. I don't think they fully appreciated all that was actually going to be involved. And I was really fortunate to gain a place at Imperial College in London to study biochemistry. I'm not sure my A-levels would cut it today. I've seen the look of surprise on A-level students now when I tell them what entry level I needed to achieve to get there. But it was a fantastic time. It was really exciting. It was just when molecular biology was really taking off. We were learning how to clone genes, how to manipulate biological systems. So it was really, really interesting. And I wanted to continue to learn, and I wanted to continue to understand in more detail how things work. So it was a very natural progression for me then to study for a PhD, which I did at what was then the Imperial Cancer Research Fund, now Cancer Research UK, and that was supported by University College London, because charities don't have degree awarding powers. And that was a really wonderful experience. And I then again was lucky that I didn't really have to think too hard about what that next step was. And I did a series of postdoctoral posts and undertook research between 1989 and 95 at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, which it was a fantastic city to live in, but it was also a really interesting international research institute that I was working in, which sort of brought all of those sort of different perspectives together. But after a period of time, I knew that I wanted to have my own independent group, and it was great. I had a very inspiring advisor, but I knew that I wanted something more, and I wanted to actually set up my own group. So I was really fortunate again to be appointed to a lectureship position at the University of Bath, where I progressed through my career doing the things that academics are expected of. Things that are expected of them. So teaching undergraduates, masters, training postgraduate students, writing for grants, writing papers, getting involved in learned societies, and all of those types of things. But partway through that, and subsequent to the birth of my two daughters, I started to feel like I was stuck in a bit of a rut. And to get out of that rut, I applied for various fellowships, including a BBSRC Research Development Fellowship, which I was fortunate enough to be awarded. Nigel Brown will remember this. He was the chair of that interview panel. And that really set a whole new direction for my research. It freed me up from the burden of those other activities, the education-led activities that I was involved in, and allowed me just to really concentrate on my research. And I think I haven't actually looked back since that time. I then became much more involved in the work of research councils, and I was headhunted in 2012 to become the Director of Science at BBSRC, which wasn't an opportunity that I was looking for, but reflecting back now was actually one of the best things that I could have done for me. And the reason I say that is because throughout my career, as I reflect on it, I've learned that actually with a periodicity of about 6 to 7 years, I need a new challenge or a new opportunity to move on to keep me motivated and interested. And I think that's been true throughout my career. And I wonder whether that's what attracted me about making that change and going into the science policy arena. So it's a very big change, going from working as a full-time academic, supporting a family, balancing all of those things, to becoming involved, to becoming a public servant and working for a public sector organisation. So as Ian has said, BBSRC is the largest public funder of bioscience research training infrastructure in the UK, with a budget of around 420 million per annum, which is invested in universities and institutes across the UK and in partnership with international organisations. But this was a whole new experience for me. I'd had limited kind of experience at that interface through work that I'd done with the research councils and through public-private partnership that we'd had, that Louise will remember, the Stem Cells for Safer Medicines. But I think the things that I would reflect on and that I'd learnt through and the skills I developed through my academic career really helped me make that transition. It was hugely demanding, and I never anticipated that it would be more demanding than an academic career, but it was. I've never worked so hard in my life, and I've always been quite dedicated and determined. But also it was hugely rewarding when you could actually see the fruits of your labours, as it were, really taking shape and enabling change to happen. I think the things that were really important, the skills that I really drew on, were being collaborative, being cooperative, recognizing that those skills are really important when you're trying to influence groups and stakeholders, and that those spheres of influence are different, and you need to spend time developing those. Building trust, building partnership, and building understanding of all of the stakeholders involved was really important when you're working at that very complex interface where there's many different competing demands. But if I were to characterise my experiences whilst at BBSRC, now I should add that I joined in 2012 as Executive Director of Science, but in 2015, our then Chief Executive, Jackie Hunter, announced that she was stepping back from her role. So I actually became interim Chief Executive in 2016 until the creation of UKRI, when I became Executive Chair in 2018. So this is a period of over a decade. And during that decade, I would characterize 3 words, or use 3 words to characterize it: uncertainty, challenges, and change. And we had a huge amount of political and policy instability. So I think I counted up that we had around 12 science ministers over that 10-year period, some appearing more than once. And we probably had a similar number of secretaries of state as well. So you can imagine with each of those ministers, they each having their own priorities, their own things that they would want to deliver. So you could be midway through delivering a really important piece of policy work for X minister, and then they change overnight, literally, to Y minister, and you kind of have to regroup and understand what their priorities are. So a lot of instability, a lot of starting and stopping things and changing. 2015 saw the publication of Paul Nurse's first review, which recommended the creation of UK research and innovation. And the following year, we obviously had the referendum on EU membership. And I remember the morning after the referendum vote, I think we probably all felt like we had a collective hangover, couldn't quite believe what the outcome had actually been. And it had a huge impact on the research community, because there's so many questions about whether we would continue to be associated with Horizon Europe, which is seen as a really important vehicle for supporting influence, collaboration, and fantastic science across the European network. And we spent many thousands upon thousands of person hours in the research councils, which would have been largely unseen in planning mitigation plans for all possible eventualities around whether we associated, whether we had a Brexit deal or we didn't have a Brexit deal. If we didn't, we would crash out of Horizon Europe. What would we need to do? What were the alternatives? And that was a real roller coaster. And as I said, it took an awful lot of effort and an awful lot of people's time involved in that. And if that weren't sufficient uncertainty and change and challenge, we then had the pandemic in 2020. I recall actually being on my way to Vancouver for a memorial symposium for my postdoc advisor, who had passed away a few months earlier. When the World Health Organization declared the pandemic, I spent a very nervous 10 days wondering whether I was actually going to get back to the UK. And I was hugely relieved when I got on the flight. It felt like it was almost the last flight to get home. So I don't think I could have run BBSRC with an 8-hour time difference, so even though we were running it remotely, because everyone was at that point working from home. And of course, that set out a whole new series of challenges, how we actually could deliver business as usual in terms of our grants panels. We needed to continue to do that to continue momentum, but also we had to respond and set up processes to fund new research to tackle the pandemic and COVID. And so, it kind of drew on a lot of my academic expertise at that point, because we had to do things quickly and we had to make decisions quickly about what we were going to fund. As if that weren't enough, we also went over that period, changes of departments from business innovation and skills to business energy and industrial strategy to the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology. And again, there were all of that change to an uncertainty to manage with. And more recently, we've seen a rise in kind of the anti-woke agenda and the culture wars, which is impacting the sector in not particularly helpful ways. In spite of the uncertainty and the challenge, as a leader in BBSRC and UKRI, we were really focused on delivering change for UK bioscience, supporting the community and enabling that change. UK bioscience is second only to the US when you look at many different metrics. And so we wanted to make sure that we were supporting that system to maintain our sort of world-leading capability in that area. And I'm going to share a few examples with you that sort of illustrate some of those important milestones, I would say. I might call them achievements during that time. And against, obviously, that backdrop of all of that uncertainty and challenge and change that we had in terms of policy and stability. So one of the things that I look back on and that I feel most proud of is the Forward Look for Bioscience that we published in 2018. This was the result of extensive consultation with our community. And what we heard from the feedback from that community was that they understood the importance of bioscience in tackling strategic challenges, and BBSRC talked about those frequently. But what we talked about less frequently was our appreciation and the value that we placed on really fundamental blue skies frontier bioscience, discovery bioscience, which couldn't be further from the truth. We really did still value that, but we weren't articulating it. So I was really pleased that we were able to articulate and really set that front and center of that forward look that we published in 2018. It set us in a very good position for the creation of UKRI because we had our strategy set out. And I think to date, this is still one of the slides or one of the kind of infographics that I feel best describes what it is that BBSRC wants to achieve in supporting UK bioscience. Some particular examples where we have worked closely at that research policy interface is around synthetic and engineering biology. So when I joined BBSRC in 2012, one of the very first things that we were doing were delivering against the 8 great technologies, of which one was synthetic biology. And these were the 8 great technologies which David Willits, who was then Minister of Science and who was probably the most enduring Minister of Science actually during my time at the Research Councils, was really putting great emphasis on. So we were involved in delivering that Synthetic Biology for Growth programme, setting up the Synthetic Biology Research Centres and along adjacent investments. There are many successes that have come out of those investments. Towards the end of 2019, the Royal Academy of Engineering published a report on engineering biology, which is about taking the concepts of synthetic biology and really ramping up the commercialisation and translation and realising the potential of that. And that stimulated us to think about whether we should be thinking in a similar way that the Quantum Technologies programme had in developing a national engineering biology programme. And here we worked closely with colleagues from the MOD, including Angela McLean, who was CSA there then, obviously government chief scientist now, and colleagues at DSTL to start to develop that concept. One of the opportunities that the pandemic afforded us was actually widespread online community engagement, which really helped to shape that concept of an engineering biology programme and build the evidence for that. We then went through a process of really socialising that concept with chief science advisors, with the Scottish Scientific Advisory Council, and then building that support and influencing in that very evidence-based way. such that engineering biology was recognised as one of the critical technologies for the UK. It's recognised in the Science and Technology Framework. A national vision has been published, and more recently there have been new investments in new engineering biology mission hubs and mission awards. So again, I think this is a nice example and illustration where you build the case, you build the collaboration, you build trust and partnership, and you can influence that broader policy agenda. The third example that I will reflect on is the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund. Now, this was a fund. It was an industrial strategy with a challenge fund associated with it. There was around an investment of new money of around £2 billion at this time, led by Greg Clark, who was the then Secretary of State in Bayes. And it was really about how can we drive productivity, improve productivity across different industrial sectors in the UK to drive economic growth and to increase the number of high value jobs in the UK. Now, interestingly, an interesting reflection is that we had started to deliver the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund in 2016 before the publication of the industrial strategy in 2017. And this is often what seems to happen. There's a bit of a mismatch in that timing. And initially, I think it was seen that the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund was very focused on innovation. And so Innovate UK took a real lead in that. But that actually failed to recognise the value of bringing research, academic research, into solving some of the challenges which business had actually set out. So we needed better join up against that. And so Mark Walpott, who was the CEO at the time, asked me if I would become involved on behalf of the research councils to help build a collaborative partnership to deliver that Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund. It was hugely challenging. There was a huge amount of focus on this, both from government and the UKRI board. We were working with a shoestring staff, and to deliver this really big kind of showcase policy, if you like. But we went forward and we built those partnerships. We developed a way of funding challenges in waves. We had 3 waves. The third wave, we actually had an online expression of an outline expression of interest, which we got over 250 expressions of interest from different industry players setting out challenges that they wanted the Industrial Strategy Challenge funding for to help them solve, working with our sort of wider research community. So the things that delivering this particular policy required of those involved, including myself, was huge resilience. It was really, really challenging. And we really had to up our game and really be on it because all eyes were on this particular programme. But I think reflecting back, it was a very successful programme in the way we actually delivered it. But interestingly, whilst when it was published in 2017, it was hoped that this industrial strategy would be enduring, it was replaced in 2021 by the Build Back Better policy. And actually, the industrial strategy was quietly withdrawn in 2023. So it just shows kind of the cycles of when you want some stability and business really wants long-term certainty if they're going to invest in things. Political cycles mean that often those long-term ambitions are not realised. And I just want to pull out one challenge from that Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund that I was very involved in as kind of the challenge sponsor, not as the challenge director, but as the challenge sponsor. And that was the Transforming Food Production Challenge. Now, this was part of our second wave of investments in the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund, and we'd set out the ambition of catalysing the transformation of food production so it could achieve net zero by 2040. We had an advisory group that really challenged us on how we were delivering this. And Ian Boyd will remember because he was a member of that advisory group. And Mark Walpott, the then CEO of UKRI, really challenged us on how we were actually going to deliver this programme. And I'm really pleased that they did, because whilst at the time it might have been uncomfortable, it made us think really carefully about how this programme could be transformational. The programme has just finished. Its final evaluation has just been published. Over 92 projects were funded, £68 million of investment, £394 million of co-investment were raised, which for this sector, in terms of food production and agriculture, is amazing, and we never imagined that we would get that close. I know you can't read the panel with all the green boxes on it. That's the from the evaluation report against our logic model for what we wanted to achieve for this challenge. The key point is that most of these boxes are some shade of green, demonstrating that these things had been achieved, and there is evidence around that. So from a difficult gestation, a challenge, improvement, actually delivery of a programme that really is making a difference, is growing businesses, growing the number of jobs, and growing investment. So I think the Challenge Fund was difficult, but I think it really was very productive and did meet its aims. I now shift a little bit away from bioscience research related policy at that interface, and to consider a little bit more some broader system-wide policy change. So for a number of years, the UK government had an ambition to invest 2.4% of GDP in research and development by 2030. The numbers have subsequently changed because of ways that the Office for National Statistics calculates this, but this was the policy environment that we were in around 2020. It was modelled that in order to achieve this big increase in R&D investment, it was about 1.7% of GDP at the time, we'd need 150,000 more people in the research and innovation system to deliver that ambition. So under Amanda Soloway, when she was Minister of Science, with the support of UK, they developed a strategy to help tackle this, which is about really creating an inclusive, sustainable and vibrant research and innovation sector in the UK, attracting a wide range of people and recognising that a wide range of people in skills and career paths were going to be important in this. It was really a call for action, for change, to position the UK at the forefront and to help maintain at the forefront as a leading science and innovation country. So I was, as Ian mentioned in his introduction, became the UKRI champion for our work that was associated with delivering this people and culture strategy. And we developed a broad portfolio approach of a whole series of interrelated activities, because none of these activities don't stand alone. No one actor can deliver the change that's required to deliver this vibrant system. It requires a lot of different activities, many of which are overlapping and integrated, but you need some sort of framework to work around. And you need some sort of framework around which to work collaboratively with partners in the system, because we all have to be change agents in this. And it's difficult and it's challenging, and we have to work our way through. And I'm just going to give a couple of examples of that, which I've highlighted here. So the first one that I want to highlight as being a really important part of policy influence and development for research more broadly, not just for the biosciences, was around the New Deal for postgraduate research. And this is one of the sort of highlight ambitions that were set out in the R&D People and Culture strategy, looking at how we could make sure that our postgraduate offer was attractive, because actually attracting talent at that stage is absolutely critical, and attracting a diverse pool of talent at that stage is absolutely critical. And one of the key achievements of the early wins, really, although it took time to do that, was increasing the minimum stipend that UKRI would provide to support its funded PhD students by nearly 20% over 2 years. Now, we had to build an evidence base around that, and it was happening at the same time as there was significant pressure from some student campaign groups to increase the stipend, because it coincided with double-digit inflation that the country was experiencing, and hence the pressures on cost of living. We had to tread a really fine line as sort of that policymaker at the interface between the research community and government, because we were sort of clearly advised that we couldn't treat this as a cost of living increase, because that was politically sensitive, whilst there was cost of living increase across all areas and how that was actually going to be handled. But rather, and actually this was the case, because when it was conceived, this was the case, is that we wanted to make sure that the stipend was in line with both the living wage and also stipend levels at overseas nations who we would see as competitors for that talent, bringing them in for doctoral training. So again, this was about understanding the needs of different stakeholders, keeping people engaged, keeping people informed, and actually, as I said, treading that fairly fine line that we needed in order that we could get the support that was required for us to be able to announce this. And it was an absolutely huge relief when we actually got there, and I think it was very much welcomed. Of course, this is part of a suite of activities. Other things mentioned here, building that cross-sector forum of funders and providers is really important in that partnership, sharing and developing best practice, and really embedding EDI as a core requirement in doctoral training, because that's really key to how we're going to diversify that body of trainees. The second kind of tricky area to negotiate at that research policy interface was our UKRI EDI strategy. Now, UKRI had long had equality, diversity, inclusion as one of its strategic priority areas. It had an advisory group in this area. It had commissioned Advance HE to undertake a number of reviews. But as this deliberation takes quite a significant amount of time, so I kind of helped to bring together the thoughts that we had gathered and develop a draft strategy, which we then put out for wide consultation. We took back and analysed the inputs from that consultation. We reshaped and redefined our strategy. But again, throughout the time that it took to do that, there was increasing sentiment in some quarters around anti-woke, stoking the culture wars, etc. So we had to walk a really fine line here as well, so that we could actually publish this strategy. It would have been easier just to say, no, we can't. And it's, you know, it's difficult to be all things to all people. Some people wanted us to go further. Some people wanted us to back off in different areas. But we were successful in getting this through. And I think the take home for me in this was that we needed to build trust. We needed to keep all stakeholders updated. We needed to avoid surprises, and we really needed to know who our allies were, so that when we were at the position of looking for sign-off or approval from government, that actually that was forthcoming, and we didn't then stumble at that final hurdle. And I was really pleased that we were able to do that, and it's subsequently been welcomed quite broadly by the community. And there are action plans that each of the research councils have to help deliver that overall framework. So as I start to approach the end of my presentation, I just want to share my reflections, really, and again, these are my own personal thoughts on the opportunities for bioscience. I think well, throughout my career, since I went to Imperial College over 40 years ago, there's a fascination with bioscience, and it has so many possibilities. And I think it really starts with that education. And I think if I hadn't had the inspiring teachers that I had all the way through primary, secondary, tertiary, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have had the experiences and that I have. So I think that is really fundamental. And then thinking about how we attract people and a diverse workforce, because we know a diversity of thought is really important for those creative processes, for productivity, and it's also true of research. And how can we make the environments that those people are working in really inclusive so they feel welcome, so that we can continue to attract and retain people? I've talked about discovery bioscience being really critical. You never know where the next big shift in understanding is going to come. So vital that we do that alongside making sure that the potential that biosciences have in tackling some of those global challenges is realised. And I can't imagine a future without bio-based solutions tackling and reducing our dependence on fossil fuels. There's already many examples out there that if I had longer, I could talk about, but I shan't. Embracing innovation and transformative technologies. I've mentioned synthetic and engineering biology. Clearly, artificial intelligence is another area where we're going to see revolutions. We're already starting to see that and the impact across bioscience. I think we do a reasonable job of talking about bioscience and telling the stories, and I think the Royal Society of Biology plays a really critical role in that. But what more can we do to excite people? Because I think that license to operate is really important and helps us with that final point that I have on this slide in terms of how we can influence policy. If there is broad support for areas, then that will actually help us to influence policy. And I think that there's more that we can do. And again, really good to see the work of this society working with others in that space and to think quite strategically about how we can build on that into the future. So this is my final slide, and I just wanted to share a few closing thoughts with you. It's been a huge privilege, actually, to serve the bioscience community. It's been challenging, but it has also been rewarding. But I think that challenge is something which, as I identified when I talked about my career path, is actually something that has been really motivating for me and something that I've needed new challenges every so often. And certainly there was never a dull moment working at the research councils. There were plenty of challenges, but building trust, working collaboratively and in partnership, being an authentic leader, I think, were really important, and having resilience. Resilience was really, really required. There were some tough times. Some of them spent sitting at this desk during the pandemic and having to be hauled out by my daughters as to actually take a break at times because there was so much pressure. You know, I genuinely believe bioscience has real potential, and we need to realise that potential through supporting a diverse group of people and ideas to come forward over the next 5, 10, 20 years. And just to loop back to career paths where I started, I didn't foresee where my career path was going to go. I was very lucky and I followed my gut instinct, and there seemed to be obvious next steps for me. Until that was that I changed path from a full-time academic to working at that science policy interface. As I said, hugely challenging, but hugely rewarding. And I think that actually we need to embrace career path flexibility and diversity because it really does deliver benefits. And I think it will do that both for wider education and the research system, and just generally help understanding of the pressures from all stakeholders and across all stakeholders. And I think that's going to be really important for the future. So I'm going to finish there and I will hand back to Ian, and I think we can have stop sharing and can have answer any questions.
Melanie, look, thank you very much indeed. That was a tremendous survey of actually a time in which there was a huge number of challenges, as you said. I mean, you know, the fact that you steered BBSRC through the pandemic era, you know, I stepped out of an equivalent kind of role just before the pandemic. I can't imagine what it would have been like during the pandemic, you know, doing those sorts of jobs. But you managed it, and so did many other people. And you know, congratulations on that. We have a few questions. I'll tell you what. I will read them out, and then you can have a go at answering them if that's all right. And actually, I'm going to start with a question myself because you talked about uncertainty, challenges, and change, and I completely agree. That really, those three words do summarize the kind of experiences that you had. But most people in the research community, and actually I think generally, look for stability. So it's at the opposite end of the spectrum of what people are really wanting. So you're observing these things going on. Um, of course, challenges are things that researchers like to address. But how can research councils, in particular UKRI perhaps, be the buffer or the dampener between what is going on, and you called it the waves of change within the political and policy community, and the research community, who really just want to get on with the job?
Yeah, so I think that the way I often used to think about it actually was research councils and UKRI were kind of the squeezed middle. So we were squeezed by the researchers wanting, that stability, but we were squeezed in the other direction from policymakers wanting change and wanting to see change. I think that the way that we handled that was really to have very clear strategies and to have clear delivery plans around that. So we could give the certainty to the research community. I think this is true for business as well, for Innovate UK. We could give them the certainty around what we saw as our key priority areas, so that would buffer them against some of that change, because some of these things are enduring. The challenge around sustainable food production is enduring. That's not going to go away. That's not going to be solved quickly. So we need to do that. And actually investing in a broad range of things means that when there is, a squeeze from the top and they want a particular area, we can probably exemplify that because we actually have that breadth, because we are protecting the community. I still say but there's that protection. Yeah. But I think that stability in terms of the strategy environment actually is helpful. But yeah, I often felt quite squeezed.
I'll bet you did. Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of questions coming in now, actually. Here's one: how important is the link between research councils and learner societies like the RSB?
Okay, I think it's a really important link, and I was very proud that BBSRC has been a member organisation for the Royal Society of Biology over a long period of time, and we've done things jointly together, and I think that's because we have different roles, and I think as a learned society, can influence policy in different ways. I'll use the lobbying word, which is not something that as a public sector organisation, UKRI or BBSRC were able to do. So I think it's those partnerships, and the Royal Society of Biology isn't the only partnership with learned societies. There are others as well, but I think it's through those partnerships, the complementarity, which is actually really important, and yeah, just sharing intelligence as well is kind of really helpful.
Yeah. I'm not the next question. I'm not surprised that somebody has asked this. It's from somebody, an anonymous attendee, that you mentioned woke and anti-woke in your talk. And so the question is, what do you mean by this, and how is it affecting BBSRC and bioscience research and policy?
Okay, so I think the sort of woke is about it's you can look up the definition. There is a formal definition of it, but it's about doing what seems fair and appropriate and the right things to do. And if you, in some ways, sort of being a good citizen and being inclusive and being sensitive and appreciating diversity and difference. But I think the anti-woke sentiment is feeling that focus on difference almost goes too far, and so there's sort of a resistance to that, because it's almost as though every individual has their own individual wants and needs, and they would actually have to be met. That's actually not sort of the case, and we know that in the bioscience community there's certain groups that are underrepresented. Women are underrepresented at senior levels in the research community. We know that Black scientists are underrepresented across the board, and it's about making shifting to a system which is actually more inclusive, so people can see their own futures in that, without resorting to very sort of strict targets, because targets might solve one specific problem for one specific group, but they don't change the system. So I think it's really trying to think about changing that system. So I think that the woke anti-woke, it's related to culture wars, it's related to, you know, sort of, you know, not wanting to be seen to be giving special preference to one particular group or another. I don't, my own personal view is that's not what being woke is. It's about being fair and inclusive and respecting that difference. I hope that helps.
I think it does. It's an immensely complicated subject, but it's one that we do need to talk about. Absolutely. Another question: do you have any advice for how anyone who has a bachelor's degree in bioscience can kickstart their career? And that's from Perseus Standing.
Okay. So I think, you know, that's a really interesting question, and I think part of the postgraduate research New Deal is actually looking at different routes into postgraduate research. So, you know, my career path was very traditional in a way. I went from undergraduate to postgraduate. But if you've had a career break, if you're a late returner, then or wanting to return to something, then the system isn't actually set up for that. So I think we need new ways of actually attracting people into the system and recognizing the different background that they've actually had. BBSRC supported something called and the name's going to escape me, but there were returning fellowships. So people who had been out of the system, who would then wanted to come back into the system, were able to give sort of support there. You know, clearly honing new skills, you know, if there's particular areas, then those are those types of things. But there's many different potential avenues. There are avenues in policy, you know, people working in public sector and civil service as well. So opportunities there. So I hope there's a few ideas, but really be led by your interests, Persia, as well, in terms of what it is that you would like to do and what you could see yourself doing in the future.
Thanks very much. What do you look back on BBSRC as the key achievements during your time there?
Okay, so I think one of the things that I'm really proud of is the team of people who I haven't given credit to during this talk, because, you know, yes, I might sort of be the figurehead and the executive chair, but actually it doesn't happen unless you've got a really dedicated team of talented people. And I'm really proud of the team that I actually built. I'm really proud of the culture that we had in BBSRC. And I think that stood us in good stead when we did all end up working from home for, I didn't go into my office for over a year, but we had these webinars regularly every week to keep that connection. And I think it was often remarked on, actually, that BBSRC colleagues had a very collaborative approach across UKRI, were seen as trusted partners. And so I'm really pleased about that in terms of the culture of the organisation. But actually, I mentioned the forward look. I'm really proud of that. I'm proud of the work that we did on the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund. I haven't mentioned the industrial strategy, the institute strategy that we developed. I'm proud of that. And then all of the work that we did on people, culture, and talent. And of course, you know, just enjoying learning about the outcomes of the research and showcasing the outcomes of the research, you know, and I used to love going on visits and hearing about the latest discoveries. Yeah, so lots and lots of things to look back and reflect on very positively.
Melanie, thank you so much. It's been an inspiration, and actually Amanda Purdon has said, and this is a quote, "Thank you, very interesting and inspirational." And I think that I certainly endorse that, and I'm sure many of us on the call will endorse that as well. So really fantastic to hear about your experiences, and I hope that what we can do in the Royal Society of Biology is take the experiences that people like you have had, implant them in young minds and allow them to develop their own experiences in the same sorts of ways through their careers. And I think that's a really important, you know, part of what we do in the Royal Society of Biology, and to enable them, to give them the environment in order that they're able to achieve what they want to, what they've set out to achieve. And with that, I'm going to call this to a close, and thank you very much indeed to everybody who's attended and all those who have contributed. Thank you. Goodbye.